Everyone, in this video we will talk about the pathologies, first chapter of general pathology, cellular adaptations. This is our first year mbbs. So the chapter is cellular adaptations. First of all, before knowing the definition of cellular adaptations, we should know about the stressors. There are two types of stressors. One is pathologic and another is physiologic. So in the pathologic stressors, example is ischemia, and pathologic stressor is pregnancy. And similarly, the definition of adaptation is a reversible change in response to stress. Any stress, in the response to the stress, if there is any reversible change in the cell, this is known as the adaptations. Now it is said to be the injury when it is irreversible. If there is irreversible changes, then it is called as the injury, and after the injury the cell death occurs. So first of all normal, then it undergoes when the any stressors comes into the cells, then it undergoes the adaptations, and after the adaptations the cell, if there is irreversible changes, then the adaptation changes to injury, and after the injury there is a death of the cell. So now there are the different types of cellular adaptations. First we are going to talk about the hypertrophy. So the hypertrophy, we should know the definition of the hypertrophy. In the hypertrophy there is an increase in the cell size. Yes, there is an increase in the cell size. Why? Because there is more proteins or the filaments increases in the hypertrophy cells, so there is increase in the cell size. It may occur together with the hyperplasia. Hyperplasia is the increase in the cell number, and this hypertrophy is the increase in the cell size. So example of this is muscle tissue. Hypertrophy with more workload causes the hypertrophy. So there are two types of hypertrophy. There is physiological and the pathological. So in the physiological, examples are the bodybuilders. We see in the bodybuilders the muscles gets hypertrophy. It is because of the its uses. In the uterus, in the pregnancy, it is due to the hormone driven. So these are the examples of physiological hypertrophy. Now let's talk about the pathological examples of the hypertrophy. In the pathological hypertrophy, the example is the left ventricular hypertrophy, and the response to it is due to the response to the hypertension or increased workload. The left ventricle gets hypertrophied. Similarly, the next cellular adaptation is cell hyperplasia. Hyperplasia is the increase in the cell number, and it is often due to the excess hormone stimulations. It is due to the excess hormone stimulations, and it may be physiologic or the pathologic. It often accompanied by the hypertrophy. This hyperplasia is also two types, physiologic and the pathologic. In the physiologic hyperplasia, example is breast growth at puberty. So in the puberty, the breast growth take place, and this is the example of the hyperplasia. Hyperplasia and the hypertrophy of the glandular epithelial cells occurs in the breast growth. And similarly, the liver regenerations, partial liver donation, and if in the transplantation of the partial liver, then the half of the liver grows back to the full size. It is due to the cellular adaptation hyperplasia, and the hyperplasia of the remaining hepatocytes. In the liver regeneration, breast growth, and in the bone marrow. In the bone marrow also hyperplasia occurs. Now let's talk about the examples of the pathologic hyperplasia. In the pathologic hyperplasia is the endometrial hyperplasia. It is due to the growth due to the estrogen, endometrial hyperplasia. Now similarly, there is a prostatic hyperplasia. This is the excessive response to the androgens. Similarly, the human papilloma virus, skin warts, epidermal hyperplasia, genital warts, mucosal hyperplasia. This is also an example of the hyperplasia. This human papilloma virus also causes the hyperplasia of the cell, that is epidermal hyperplasia. It causes the skin warts, and the mucosal hyperplasia, it causes the genital warts. Now let's talk about some applied aspects. This malignancy is often develops from the hyperplasia, and there is increase in the cell divisions, and the more chances of the there is more chances of error in the cell cycle control, and there is uncontrolled death. So the malignancy normally develops from the which types of cellular adaptations? This is the hyperplasia. Now let's discuss about the benign prostatic hyperplasia. This is the pathologic hyperplasia. It does not lead to the malignancy. This is the only hyperplasia. BPS is the only hyperplasia which does not lead to the malignancy. Now let's talk about the hypertrophy and hyperplasia. Difference between the hypertrophy and the hyperplasia. In the hypertrophy, permanent and non-dividing cells, myocyte cells. Let's discuss first about the permanent or non-dividing cells. These are the myocytes, skeletal muscles cells, nerve cells. They are the permanent in the G terminally differentiated growth state, and this is due to the hypertrophy. So the hypertrophy occurs in the permanent or the non-dividing cells. Example, myocytes, skeletal muscle cells, nerves, and this is permanently in the differentiated state, terminally differentiated state. It does not grow further, and this is all about the hypertrophy. And now let's talk about the hyperplasia. In which cell the hyperplasia takes place? The cells capable of growth and divisions. So the hyperplasia takes place in the cells which is capable of growth and division. These cells are the epithelial cells. Epithelial cells in GI tract, breast, and the ducts or skin. Similarly, it commonly undergo the hyperplasia and may lead to the dysplasia and the cancer. Okay, now we discussed about the hypertrophy, hyperplasia. Now let's discuss about the atrophy. Atrophy is the reduction in the reduction in the size of organ and tissue. Atrophy is the reduction in the size of organ and tissue. There is a decrease in the cell size and or number of cells. There is a decrease in the cell size or number of cells, and both. There may be the decrease in the cell size or the number of cells. Okay, now let's talk about the physiological example of atrophy. Physiological example of atrophy is embryonic structures. For example, notochord, uterus after the childbirth. There is a loss of hormone stimulation, and the breast and uterus at the menopause. These all undergo the atrophy in the physiological conditions. Now the pathological examples is unused skeletal muscles. There is unused skeletal muscles. It is due to the bed rest, immobilizations. Then cachexia, it caused due to the poor nutrition and decreased blood supply, senile atrophy of the brain, atherosclerosis. And then the loss of innervations, it causes the neuromuscular disorders. Now let's discuss about the mechanism of the atrophy, how the atrophy of the cell occurs. There is a called the ubiquitin proteasome pathway. There is a proteins tagged by the ubiquitin, and this transported to the proteasome for the degradations, and the stressors may activate the ligases that attach the ubiquitin. Okay, in this way, first mechanism is ubiquitin proteasome pathway, and another is autophagy. This is a self-eating cellular components fused with the lysosomes. There are two mechanisms of atrophy: ubiquitin proteasome pathway, and another is autophagy. Now let's talk about the next cellular adaptations, that is metaplasia. This metaplasia is defined as the change in the cell type to adapt to the stress. Okay, change in the cell type. There is a new cell type able to withstand the stress, commonly from the one epithelial cell to the another. There is a change in the epithelial cells or change in the cell type to adapt the stress. This is the metaplasia, and this is the potentially the reversible, and this can lead also can lead to the dysplasia or the malignancy. Now examples, in the respiratory tract in the smokers, there is normally the columnar epithelium in the tracheal bronchi, but changes to squamous epithelium, most common metaplasia. In the respiratory tract, there is a columnar epithelium, but due to smoking or any causes, it changes to the squamous epithelium. This is the most common metaplasia. This squamous epithelium more durable, and the loss of cilia more vulnerable to infections. In this way, respiratory tract in the smokers causes the metaplasia. Now the next example is Barrett's esophagus. In the Barrett's esophagus, gastric acid is the stressor in the esophagus. Normally, there is a stratified squamous epithelium in the esophagus, so it changes to columnar epithelium. So this is a columnar metaplasia, and in previously was the example of respiratory tract infection, that was the squamous metaplasia. Okay, now let's another example is myositis ossification. This is the muscle metaplasia to the bone, not epithelial cells. Metaplasia commonly occurs in the epithelial cells, but here this is the one exception, myositis ossifications. This is the muscle metaplasia to the bone. This is not the epithelial cells. So there is a mesenchymal cells converted to the osteoblastic tissue, form the laminar bone in the muscles, follow the trauma. Example of hip arthroplasty, muscles become the strips in the myositis ossificans. Now let's talk about some related thing about the metaplasia. There is vitamin A deficiency. This vitamin A deficiency is important for maintaining the epithelial cells, and this deficiency of the vitamin A causes the epithelial metaplasia and the keratinization. Similarly, in the upper tract, epithelial metaplasia epithelial replaced by the keratinizing squamous cells, and this abnormal epithelium causes the pulmonary infections, vitamin A deficiency. And this vitamin A deficiency also causes the xerophthalmia, dry eyes. This is normal epithelium secretes the mucus, but it is replaced by the keratinized epithelial cells due to the lack of vitamin A. Now apocrine metaplasia is the, let's discuss about the apocrine metaplasia. This is the form of the fibrocystic changes in the breast, also called this benign epithelial alternations. So alternations to the lobular epithelial cells. It takes on appearance of the apocrine gland. It does not lead to the dysplasia or the cancer. So in the previous of hyperplasia, BPS, benign prostatic hyperplasia, was the hyperplasia which does not lead to the dysplasia or cancer, and in the metaplasia this is apocrine metaplasia which does not lead to the dysplasia or the cancer. Now let's discuss about the last cellular adaptation, that is the dysplasia. This dysplasia means the disordered proliferations. This is non-neoplastic. This is non-neoplastic but can be precancerous. This is mild dysplasia, can be resolved, but the severe dysplasia may be irreversible, and it may be converted to the cancers. It is usually occurs in the epithelial tissues. It is usually preceded by the hyperplasia or the metaplasia. Now this is pleomorphs. There is abnormal nuclei. There is a hyperchromatic, and the nuclei is large. And the mitotic figure, there is a mitotic figures. Example, there is a clumped chromatin. There is a clumped chromatin, and example is a cervical dysplasia. So these all are about the cellular adaptations. You can make the note. For the university examinations by taking the screenshot. So thank you.